It's Valet1 here. I love Frost DK, and I wanted to make a Frost DK guide to show everyone else how cool and how fun it is. Let's get right into it. I have a lot of experience on Frost DK, and these are my logs. Currently, I'm currently rank 3 All-Star, and I think rank 6 for boss damage in the world. First thing I'm going to go over is the talent trees. So there are two main talent trees that are going to be using as Frost DK throughout the expansion. And the first one I'm going to go over is the early game spec or the sub-blood spec. There are three main talent points which are beneficial from this spec, or from the blood tree specifically, and that's Subversion, Dark Conviction, and Bladed Armor. So Bladed Armor, you know, being a plate user is going to provide you a significant amount of attack power. I think around 300 to 350 in phase 1 gear. In addition, Dark Conviction is going to increase your critical strike rating on everything, and then Subversion is going to add a little bit more crit to that, Obliterate and Blood Strike. So in these short fights where one extra crit matters or a little bit of extra AP on your Obliterate matters, this spec is going to outweigh the alternative, which I'll go over next. The second spec I'm going to go over is the Sub-Unholy Spec. So its main benefits can be seen from a few talents, the main ones being Blood-Caked Blade, Ravenous Dead, Virulence, and Epidemic. This is considered the later game build because you need your auto attack damage to reach a certain threshold where Blood-Caked Blade is dealing approximately 5% of your damage in a single target fight for this to be better than the extra crit and extra attack power that we were just talking about. And so since in phase 1 and phase 2 your weapon damage is pretty low, that's why this is considered the later game build. The second talent which provides the most benefit from the Sub-Unholy Spec is the Epidemic talent. So this talent pretty much allows you to get a triple Obliterate in your rotation every other rune refresh. Because of this, the rotation is often seen as more enjoyable and, you know, makes more sense rather than in the sub-blood spec where you're refreshing your diseases very early on in their duration, which I'll go over more in the rotation section. So in addition to these two talents, there are a few other talents in this tree which provide benefit that we get. So the 20% shadow damage on auto attacks, that doesn't do very much, but it does a little. A 3% strength, obviously we really like that. And the bonus contribution provided to ghouls is also beneficial. When Raised Dead actually attacks the boss, you get some hit percent as well on your spells here from Virulence. So honestly, in general, I would say the Unholy Tree provides a lot more, but it kind of depends on your weapon damage, and that's what we're sort of relying on. And so one thing that the Unholy subspec loses versus the blood subspec is we take 1 talent point out of Black Ice, which is 2% frost and shadow damage, and we lose Chill of the Grave as well. There's some math behind the value of Black Ice, considering that a lot of your damage isn't frost and shadow and it's mostly melee, but we won't go over that here. Okay, next I want to talk about glyph choices, and honestly for Frost DK, your glyph choices are very, very straightforward. The first ones I'll discuss are the major glyphs, so Glyph of Frost Strike, Obliterate, and Disease. These are always going to be the 3 glyphs you use, and it'll never change throughout the entire expansion. Obviously, Glyph of Obliterate being the most beneficial, you definitely don't want to be missing out on this. As for minor glyphs, there are a couple more options available here. For example, instead of Glyph of Horn of Winter, you could use Glyph of Blood Tap if you'd like to save some HP when you use Blood Tap. Obviously, Glyph of Pestilence and Raised Dead's benefits don't need to be spoken for. Next up, I want to talk about professions. So the first profession you're definitely going to want to have as a Frost DK is Engineering, because its DPS benefit greatly outweighs the alternatives. There are two main reasons why. The first being the enchants provided from Engineering. On fights that require a small amount of movement, Nitro Boosts are going to maximize your uptime on the boss, in addition to giving you critical strike rating, as well as the Hyperspeed Accelerators being a 1-minute cooldown. The haste rating that they provide being active during your Unbreakable Armor is very beneficial. The second reason why is for the explosives that you have available to you. Using Sapper Charges and Serenite Bombs on every boss is going to increase your overall damage for sure, as they require no GCD and are literally just adding free damage. The other two professions I want to discuss are jewel crafting and tailoring. So for the early game or the first couple phases, jewel crafting is definitely going to be the better option, as its static strength combined with the benefit of kings and your talent tree strength modifiers. You're going to be gaining a significant amount of AP over not having these Dragon's Eyes equipped. The third profession I want to discuss is tailoring. So once the epic gems come out, the strength benefit of jewel crafting is diminished, and because of that, it may be the case that Swordguard Embroidery outweighs jewel crafting around the TOC or phase 3. However, if the fight lasts longer than 2 procs of the Swordguard Embroidery, its benefit is finding its diminishing returns. However, if the fights are short where it can proc twice, like, it's almost definitely going to be better, considering that it'll proc during your Lust and Unbreakable Armor, ideally. However, you know, with some bad RNG or perhaps the fight lengths being weirdly timed, the static strength provided over the epic gems from the Dragon's Eye might still be outweighing the Swordguard Embroidery. We'll have to see once that time comes. Even with epic gems out, you're still, as a jewel crafter, gaining 42 strength from being a jewel crafter, which is equivalent to about 84 attack power. So having 84 attack power for the whole fight, or having a 400 attack power proc during Unbreakable Armor, it's definitely debatable. There are some other things you have to consider as well. Unbreakable Armor, increasing your strength percentage, you know, your talent modifiers, as I discussed before. So in general, for new Frost DKs, I would just recommend going engineering and jewel crafting, as this will most likely be your biz for the expansion, although we may have to switch to tailoring from jewel crafting in TOC. Next, I'm going to go over consumables. So this is going to be the arsenal of consumables that you're going to want to have available to you as a Frost DK at every raid. And I'm going to go over the benefit of each. So the explosives, as I discussed in the profession section, are going to be adding free damage without invoking the global cooldown. Next, the potions. So obviously in Wrath, on a fight that's longer than 1 minute and 15 seconds, you're going to want to be pre-potting. So early on in the game, when we're playing the Sub-Blood spec, you're going to want to be pre-potting Indestructible Potion, as it provides around 100 attack power with the Bladed Armor talent. And you're going to want to be following that up with a Potion of Speed, either during the Lust phase or during Execute phase, ideally with your Unbreakable Armor. Once we start playing the Sub-Unholy spec, we'll no longer be pre-potting Indestructible, and we'll start pre-potting Potion of Speed. The food buff you're going to want to be using is Dragonfin Fillet, because it's the strength provided from the food buff scales with both your talent points and with Kings. So this is why it's better than Fish Feast, although Fish Feast also gives you a little bit of spell power, which helps your Howling Blast slightly. Having this extra strength from the percentage modifiers is going to outweigh that, definitely. The flask you're going to use throughout the whole game is going to be Flask of Endless Rage, as there's no alternative. And one sort of optional consumable you could use, which I like to use personally during Lust, is Flame Cap. So Flame Cap doesn't provide much damage over the course of a fight, so I wouldn't necessarily say this is a required consumable to do well, but as a dual wielding class with Lust and Potion of Speed and many haste effects active, you know, you're going to be auto attacking the boss a lot. I've seen Flame Cap add, you know, 2k, 3k damage at times, right? Especially when the fight is long or last the whole duration of the Flame Cap, which typically it does. So next up, we're going to go over gearing of a Frost DK. So if you're just starting out and you're looking for a pre-bis list, this is my pre-bis list, and there are a few alternatives available here. For example, the shoulders, if you have Pauldrons of Berserking, this is going to be better for you from Sunwell Plateau. Although if you don't have that, this is going to be your best option. As for the belt, I personally prefer the expertise provided from Durox, but I do know a lot of DKs prefer to use the plate belt instead. That's sort of just going to be up to you. The plate belt definitely gives you extra attack power because of the strength modifiers discussed previously. So really what we're looking for in a Priebus set, if you don't have all these items, is a decent amount of expertise rating without gemming expertise, a decent amount of hit rating as well. You don't necessarily need this much expertise either, and that goes back to my belt option that I discussed. But so if you're already getting into Max 25 and you're past the Priebus phase, this is going to be your phase 1 bis in my opinion for a long fight. And there are a few alternatives available here. The first one I'll go over is Fury of the Five Flights. There's a reason why I said long fights, right? On a long fight, Fury of the Five Flights is going to be significantly better. And when I say long, I mean a minute and 15 seconds or more, because it's going to be increasing the top end of your weapons by over 100, which, you know, in turn increases your obliterates and everything. So if, you know, you're attacking the boss for a very long time, getting a lot of obliterates, this 320 extra attack power is going to be extremely beneficial as a static effect. Alternatively, if you're looking for bis in a short fight, I would recommend using either Mirror of Truth or Grim Toll, as both of their procs, if they line up with Lust and Unbreakable Armor, likely will provide a greater benefit in a very short fight. In my opinion, how you sort of gauge the difference is, okay, will my trinket proc twice in this fight and end as soon as the fight ends? Okay, then maybe the proc trinket will be better. If that's not true, either the fight's too short or too long, I think Fury of the Five Flights will be better. However, if the fight is very, very short, aka the duration of your proc trinket, obviously the proc trinket's going to be better because it takes a few seconds to stack Fury anyways. So if you have your trinket for the whole duration of the fight, you're going to be doing well. Grim Toll is going to be your raid option, and if you can't get your hands on one of those, Mirror of Truth is not much farther behind, honestly. The main benefit of Grim Toll is the hit rating that it provides. The armor pin is very good if it procs like during, you know, your gloves and your unbreakable armor and everything, and like you're triple obliterating in that window of 10 seconds. It's going to be really, really good. Like the extra crit provided for Mirror of Truth, in addition to that same, like, if it procs when, you know, we want it to, like I said, the hit rating, it's kind of hard to come by a hit as a plate user, Frost DK in general. So that's mostly why people use this trinket, is because it's just such a valuable amount of hit for the slot. If you don't have all the gear listed on this page, there are a few stats that you're going to want to sort of maintain while looking for the pieces with the highest attack power and crit or raw stats. So the first stat that is the most important is expertise. You're going to want to have your expertise between 22 and 26 in my opinion, and there are differing opinions on this. Some people undervalue expertise, although I think being close to the expertise cap so that your rotation isn't significantly impacted by dodges is going to be very beneficial for you to get your runes on cooldown quicker, right? If your obliterate dodges, your runes are not on cooldown, you need to click it again before your runes are on cooldown, and this happening more and more times is going to be decreasing your DPS significantly. After expertise, you're going to want to try to get your hit rating, I want to say, as high as possible, right? So in the sub blood spec with no talent providing a spell hit, the spell hit cap we're going to be looking for is going to be 13%. So that's a whole lot of hit rating, right? We don't really want to be gemming hit or dropping a bunch of attack power to get this hit rating, as it only affects our Icy Touch, Howling Blast, and Pestilence, in addition to some other spells. But since in our main rotation it only affects a few spells, the benefit of being at the spell hit cap is not that great. It's definitely not so great that you want to sacrifice a lot of stats to reach it. Although if you can, you definitely want to try. So here in my phase 1 bis, I'm running about 8.5% hit, which is pretty low. But when I go over the rotation, you'll see that there's only one instance where missing a spell, well, actually 2 instances where missing a spell is extremely detrimental to your rotation and your DPS. So I think having about enough spell hit is going to be where we want to be at this stage of the game. Later on, when we're playing the Sub-Unholy Spec and we can actually reach the spell hit cap, and our Pestilence actually hitting every time matters more, being at the spell hit cap is going to be a lot more beneficial than in the Sub-Blood Spec. So after you got your spell hit as high as possible, you're going to want to be looking for strength and crit and armor pin, probably in that order. Once armor pin is more readily available on our gear, that's going to outweigh crit for sure. But once you start getting down to like haste, it's not as beneficial for Frost DK, right? Haste is not like, it's mostly just reducing your attack speed and reducing your rune cooldowns. So its value is definitely harder to see than, you know, direct damage from crits or, you know, armor reduction. Frost DK at its core is a priority system. So if you know what spell is the highest priority at a given time, you're going to be performing well as a Frost DK. Where it becomes a little bit more difficult is the priority actually kind of shifts a little bit here and there throughout the fight based on what procs you have. So understanding these procs and how these abilities scale based on what HP the boss has is how you're going to be improving yourself personally as a Frost DK. I want to go over a couple talents to aid in my explanation of the priority system and how the priority shifts. So then the first talent I'm going to go over is Killing Machine. So when you're auto attacking, you have a chance to make your next Icy Touch, Howling Blast, or Frost Strike be a critical strike. The next talent I'll go over is Rime. So when you're critting with Obliterate or Icy Touch, you have a chance to make your next Howling Blast cost no runes, although it will still invoke the cooldown of Howling Blast. But if Howling Blast is already on cooldown, it will refresh its cooldown. The next talent I want to go over is Merciless Combat. So when people always talk about execute phase and like why Frost DK has an execute phase, this is what they mean. So once the boss is below 35%, your Obliterates and Frost Strikes are dealing 12% more damage. And the final talent I want to go over is Blood of the North. So whenever you cast Blood Strike or Pestilence, you gain a death rune, or your blood runes are replaced by death runes until they're used again. However, if you use them again on Blood Strike or Pestilence, you will simply receive a death rune again, instead of it reverting back to a blood rune. So your opener as Sub-Blood is going to be Icy Touch, Plague Strike, Unbreakable Armor, Blood Tap, Obliterate, Pestilence, Empower Rune Weapon, Obliterate, Frost Strike, Obliterate, Frost Strike, Raise Dead, Frost Strike, and then now your runes have reset. So you're going to be able to use, you should have approximately 1 or 2 globals with the rotation I just described to refresh your Pestilence. So that's really where the spell hit kind of comes into play as Sub-Blood. On this one instance, or the one time you use Empower Rune Weapon, if your Pestilence misses, after that, it could result in your diseases dropping, which obviously you don't want to happen. After the Empower Rune Weapon window, your rotation is going to be very simple as Sub-Blood. You're simply going to be obliterating twice and then casting Pestilence. And if you have enough runic power, you'll prioritize Frost Strike. And if not, you'll cast Blood Strike or Horn of Winter, depending on what's available. There are some niche cases where you may have to cast Blood Strike so that your death rune isn't consumed, although that shouldn't ever happen realistically because of how Obliterate consumes both runes simultaneously. So when there's 3 targets or more, you're gonna want to be using Howling Blast over Obliterate if it's off cooldown. So in an AOE situation, what your opener might look like is this: Icy Touch, Plague Strike, Unbreakable Armor, Blood Tap, Howling Blast, Pestilence, Empower Rune Weapon, Obliterate, Obliterate, Obliterate. Hopefully you got a Rime proc there. If not, then, you know, back to the normal rotation. You may even want to save the third obliterate to be a Howling Blast instead, although you cannot delay too long or else your diseases will fall. When we're talking about trash AoE, there's sort of like two different types of pulls that can be made in trash, right? So if the trash pack will die within, you know, 10 seconds or so, there's no point to like go and spread your diseases and then cast Howling Blast. What you should do instead is cast Death and Decay and then cast Howling Blast and then, you know, throw a grenade or something like that, because this is going to provide more damage over that 10-second window than the minimal amount of percentage modifier gained on the Howling Blast from spreading your diseases, which might tick only once anyways. The other type of trash pull, where the mobs are more long-lived or won't die in about 10 seconds, that's when you're going to want to go in and spread your diseases, then use Howling Blast as you're fishing for a Killing Machine proc by doing that, because now you're autoing, you know, which you should sort of already be doing anyways in the alternative, but you're going to have all your runes on cooldown before a Killing Machine could ever have procced in the first example. If your Death and Decay is on cooldown too, that's what I would recommend. Even if the pack won't last for very long, just go ahead and spread your diseases and then Howling Blast, and that's likely the maximum amount of globals you'll get during the trash pack. And this will allow you to hopefully get a Killing Machine proc and be doing some decent damage, even without Death and Decay. And so there are a few like advanced tips I'm gonna go over now, which aren't really relevant in the rotation, but sort of makes you think like, how am I going to change my current priority? So the first one I want to go over is the use of Anti-Magic Shell. Using Anti-Magic Shell to gain runic power from AoE damage is gonna be extremely beneficial to your DPS when you're running low on runic power, which is typically after the opener. You know, a good example I can provide is Saffron, right? Once you start running low on runic power, use your Anti-Magic Shell to absorb the blizzard, and you'll go right back to 120 runic power almost instantly because of its scaling. The next tip is Ghoul snapshotting. So we don't do a lot of snapshotting here as a Frost DK. That's more of an unholy thing, but there is one thing we can snapshot, and that's our Raised Dead. So you're definitely going to want to be casting Raised Dead at least during Lust. If you could cast it during your Potion of Speed, Unbreakable Armor, Greatness proc, that would be really good too, although most of its benefit is going to be from haste and attack power. Another sort of advanced tip I'll go over is for like when you're in an AoE situation and your Howling Blast is on cooldown, but you can't cast Death and Decay, but you can cast Obliterate. Cast Obliterate to fish for Rime, and then hopefully you'll get a second Howling Blast in the fight, which can be really good in a very short trash fight. And the last like advanced tip I'll call them, I'll go over, is using Unholy Presence to catch up during the raid, or during times of movement where losing one Unholy Rune won't matter that much. So if you're ever feeling like you're running behind on trash, or you know, you need to move from point to point and you don't have Nitro Boost, you're going to be wanting to switch into Unholy Presence, as long as using the rune doesn't harm you that much. And so there are a few macros I'm going to go over now as well. There's not too many macros you need as a Frost DK, but one that I love is the Unbreakable Armor macro. And that pretty much just uses Blood Tap, then Unbreakable Armor, and uses your gloves. I'm sure you could add some other stuff in here too, like Blood Fury if you wanted, if you're an Orc, or Berserking perhaps if you're a Troll. The next thing I would recommend as a Frost DK is you're going to want to have Rune Strike and Start Attack macroed into pretty much all of your abilities. And the reason why is because sometimes bosses can do AoE damage which can be dodged or parried, and if that happens, you're getting free damage, and a lot of it, if you read Rune Strike's scaling. Thanks everyone, I hope you learned a lot about Frost DK today, and if you have any questions, feel free to DM me or message me in-game on Benediction. I'm always happy to answer questions, and I just love Frost DK, and I want to push all the Frost DKs to their highest potential, since it's a little hard to beat those Unholies currently. But yeah, please subscribe and like the video if you enjoyed, and catch me on Twitch at twitch.tv/Filet1. Peace.